Everybody, Greg Pruitt here with the Idaho Dispatch. It is December 23rd, 2021, and for those that are celebrating shortly, Merry Christmas to all of you. We won't be doing another one of these until after the Christmas season, so hopefully sometime next week, possibly the week after, we'll do another recap. But we wanted to get on just before Christmas and hope that you guys are all safe and well and with spending time with family and friends and whoever you celebrate Christmas with. So with that, let's briefly, so for those that don't know, this is called the recap, where we kind of go over some of the recent content that we've posted on social media or posted on our website, and we just kind of talk about that. A lot of times we'll add additional details that may not make it into some of the articles that we are covering. And so I figured before Christmas we would do one more of these shows and kind of get some more content going and more discussions. If you guys have additional discussions that you would like to bring up here on the live show. So with that, first things first, this story has actually not come out yet and it won't come out until Christmas morning, but we are excited, and we've talked about this a little bit previously, that the Idaho Dispatch is going to be launching an online museum for some of the historical newspapers that we have been gathering over the last, I don't remember when we started, like 4 months, 5 months ago. We started gathering some historical newspapers. Some of those were purchased online, some were purchased from supporters, and some were donated from supporters. And part of that is we want to preserve some of the history, and as newspapers continue to decline and a lot of stuff goes online, we wanted to preserve some hard copies of historical events from across the world, from particularly here in the United States, and especially here from the state of Idaho. So if you have some big historical event that took place in Idaho, we would love to, if you're looking to get rid of some historical newspapers that you have, or you find some, be sure to let us know, and we'd love to take a look at those. So with that, before we get into some of the other stories that we've covered recently, and I've got a couple monitors, and so I'm trying to look at everything that we're going to be covering today on the show. We want to talk about what we posted this morning and just go into that a little bit more and give you guys a little bit more detail about why we posted the question that we did. Because really, it goes all the way back to the start of the Idaho Dispatch and why and how we are trying to do it the way that we are trying to do it. When the Idaho Dispatch first started, a lot of people said, is it going to be a conservative news organization to counter what is in the mainstream media? And I said, well, no, I don't. There's lots of news outlets across the country and here in Idaho that go from both directions. There's stuff that leans to the right, there's stuff that leans to the left, but we really didn't see anything where there was a real effort, and I mean a real effort, to just tell people the news, right? To just report the news, and despite whatever personal biases I have, leave all of that out, right? You can find my opinions on a lot of things on other places, but we wanted to leave it out of here. Could we do it? Could we pull it off? And would people care? That's what we really didn't know was, there's lots of news sites on both sides of the political spectrum across the country who will give you um, news with a definitive slant to your beliefs. And our goal when we started this was, do people care anymore if it's just reporting on what is happening and just reporting on what people are saying? And yes, we're going to post any facts that we can provide. We're going to post text messages and emails and pictures and videos and whatever we can provide, we'll provide that. But I the effort would be, I leave out all bias that I possibly can. And that's extremely difficult, maybe impossible, I don't know. But you'll notice if you read my articles that I write when we're trying to write news articles, so the op-eds are obviously opinion pieces, right, from some of our readers that submit content. Those have bias, okay? But I'm talking about our news articles. When we write a news article, we try to let both sides, or all sides, I should say, because sometimes there's more than two, have their say about a political issue. Most political issues are not just straight up black and white, right? A lot of it's opinion, and a lot of it's opinion on a lot of things that are very convoluted and complicated. And so, there's an effort by a lot of the mainstream media outlets to silence people because and they're actually just saying straight up now, we don't need to report both sides. That's not our job. And so my goal when we started Idaho Dispatch, and by the way, for those that wonder, because I there are some people who are like, oh, Greg, it's just you. I am the only one that writes the articles, but there's actually four people that own the company. And so, and we're, again, hoping at some point to bring on additional writers that can help out, which means we have to grow the company to where we can hire people to even do some part-time unbiased writing. And that's been the hard part is some people will reach out and say, hey, I'd like to be write some news stories. And I said, okay, are you looking to do it, unbiased and all that no, 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 I definitely want to put my slant on it. And I'm like, well, that's not going to work. Okay, we can't have that. That's not the goal. And so our goal was when we started this was, will people care? Because we really didn't know because they're so. I mean, honestly, the other day I went on to news sites, national news sites on both sides, what people would consider, stuff on the right and stuff on the left, and none of them. Like you could read the headline and tell that they were deliberately attacking somebody in their headline or trying to get you to move in a certain direction, even in the headline itself. And then I would read the articles on both sides, and it's like, okay, well, clearly, they're trying to push me in this direction. At least that's how I felt. Okay, reading that stuff, and that's kind of what we thought. That's not what journalism was supposed to be. It's supposed to be, here's what these people are saying, here's the facts we can provide, and you decide whatever you want to believe out of all of that. And so you look, Idaho, I don't, it's no secret, Idaho is a Republican controlled state. There's probably a lot more conservatives than liberals. I don't think anybody would argue with that. Um, and people have told me, hey, why don't you just turn the dispatch into more of something like Breitbart or Daily Wire or Fox News, where you're kind of given both sides, but there's a definitive slant towards one direction. And if you do that, you'll probably make more money as a company, and you'll definitely have more readership. And I said, probably. I could do it that way. I could do it that way, and we would probably grow much faster. um, but honestly, I didn't want to. I don't want to. I said if there's plenty of that stuff out there. What I was trying to do was do something different, which was trying to do news the old way, the old-fashioned way, so to speak. Um, but maybe in the end, that's not what people wanted because I really don't know. And so recently, we covered a story because a bunch of high school and there were some college kids and some other adults there held a rally at the Capitol for they wanted to get climate change science into schools or more of it than what I guess there is currently. And so they held an event, and the individual who held that event, Shiva, he had actually reached out to me prior to the event and said, "Are you guys going to be covering this event at the Capitol?" And I said, "I can't. I live in Eastern Idaho now, and I don't have the time with the. It was a really late notice. I said I just don't have the ability to cover that right now, which is also something where we want to try and remedy, is to at the very least have cameras in places to live stream events or whatever." And I said, "But if you send me a press release, we'll put out a press release because we'll put out any group's press release about events that they're holding." And he never actually ended up doing that, and he reached out to me after the event was over, several days after, I think, and said, "Hey, here's how the event went, here's blah 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 blah, and here's videos and here's pictures and everything." I mean, he provided everything that we would have wanted to write a story about the event. So I watched his speeches, I watched the speeches by the other individuals, and we wrote a story about it. And I said, "Hey, look, I'm the type of person where I will sit down, I'll interview anybody." And he's like, "I'd love to do an interview." Okay, I said, "Fine." Very few people from, I guess, that side of the political spectrum, you could say, have been willing to come on to the Idaho Dispatch and interview with me, mainly because they know who I am outside of doing Idaho Dispatch stuff. And that's fine. That's their opinion. I have interviewed Representative Brooke Green. She's a Democrat out of Boise. I've offered to interview when I go to the Capitol and do interviews with legislators. I've offered to do interviews with several Democrats, and she's the only one that's taken me up so far. But for me, I thought this, to me, so a lot of the, I guess, feedback on people who said I should not interview this young man were mostly people who said he's too young, right? Don't give this young individual a platform. But for me, if I'm putting on my blinders for how I feel, it was, is this a news story? A bunch of kids holding a rally at the Capitol, and they went up to the governor's office and they did all this stuff. Is this a news story? And I said, well, of course it is. It's a political event taking place in the Capitol. The age didn't really matter to me. It was, here's something that's happening. Here's a youth activist who is leading the charge for a cause that he believes in, and he has a bunch of followers and all this other kind of stuff. Why wouldn't I interview him, despite whatever personal beliefs I may have that differ from his? Okay, and so that's the types of decisions that ultimately we have to make as a news organization. Are we going to do this and just say, look, if this was a 17-year-old young man leading a cause for, pro-life cause or pro-Second Amendment cause or some other cause, would I have that same opinion of, don't interview, he's too young, it doesn't matter, or she, okay? Um, and so I guess that's kind of what went into why we decided to cover it. As I said, I have to be able to, at least in my opinion, and how we're trying to run this thing was, I've got to set aside all preconceived notions. I've got to set aside everything and just ask, is this young man who is leading all of these other people, and he gave the estimate of about 250 people, is that a news story? If 250 youth went to the Capitol and had a pro Second Amendment rally or a pro life rally, so is that newsworthy? And in my opinion, it was yes, definitely. And if somebody is willing to sit down with a reporter who has an audience maybe that is vastly more conservative than liberal, should I interview him or not? And to me, I'll interview anybody that's in the political realm, right? And that's really, I guess, what it comes down to is we try to cover political stories so that people can be informed. You don't have to agree with anybody that we interview, but to me, it's my job to interview people in the political realm and talk to them, maybe challenge them on things. And if you've watched any of the interviews I do, I always try to challenge any of the people that I interview. We've interviewed, Ammon Bundy and Ed Humphreys and Janice McGeehan and a lot of legislators, and I always try to be fair, um, but also try to ask them questions and challenge them on stuff. And I did the same thing with Shiva. I tried to give a perspective opposite of what his perspective was so that he could answer. He was actually, whether, people say he's a brainwashed kid, this, that, and the other, and that's their opinions of the young man. That's fine. I thought he was actually very, not going based on what his beliefs are, but he was very articulate. He was actually able to articulate his answers very well. However he did that, but I thought he actually was very articulate despite whatever, again, whatever personal opinions I may have of what he believes. That wasn't the point. And so, in the end, that's why we posted that. There were some people, one guy said he was going to unsubscribe from the Idaho Dispatch because I interviewed this guy. And then some others were like, don't give him a platform. This is a waste of time. I thought you were smarter than this, Greg. And again, so it really all came down to, well, is this how everybody feels? Am I wasting my time trying to do this? I guess the right way, and that was the goal. And if people don't care about doing it the way that we're trying to do it, I mean, that's certainly important, right? I don't want to waste my time. I don't want to waste your time. I don't want to try and build a company, a news organization, if people don't want both sides or aren't willing to go, okay, you know what? I don't like this person that Greg is interviewing, so I'm just going to turn it off, and then I'll watch the next content that comes out. Um, I really don't know. I wasn't sure because, to be quite frank, there's so many people that like to hear from their own side and their own perspective, and so I just wasn't quite sure. So let me look over on the comments real quick. Greg Haskell says we all have biases, part of being human, disclose them. And yeah, I mean, I think everybody does have biases. Again, when I write, I try to leave all that stuff out as best as I can. Um, Let me see what here. Dave Edwards says there's a big difference between putting a slant on things and providing context and background. Some may see that as slanted because context and background doesn't support their slant. Context and background makes your news reporting more of a full picture and more valuable to your audience. And then Stacy Howe says, stick to your principles, Greg. Some of us long for simple facts. We can formulate our own opinions. And so I would say overall, most people seem to like the direction that we're going. Um, but just with some of the feedback that we've gotten, I wanted to find out, is that ultimately what people want? Is that ultimately what people will pay to subscribe for? We only charge $2.97 a month, and that's mostly for. Its signal might start dropping, by the way, because we have a huge snowstorm down here in southeast Idaho right now. I hope that's what people will subscribe for. That's why we did $2.97 a month. Was like, hey, how do we make this affordable for people to help? It doesn't being a subscriber at $2.97 a month doesn't really do much. We're hoping to launch a hard copy quarterly um, newspaper, I guess, or that contains some articles and stuff. We'd hope to do something like that, and we're still working on that. It's a lot of work, um, so that would be a benefit. But really, when we say, hey, it's $2.97 a month, we're trying to avoid a paywall as much as we can. We're trying to avoid all of the stuff that everybody hates about the mainstream media. We want to avoid a paywall. That's what everybody's pushing me to do behind the scenes and marketing and stuff. And I'm trying to avoid that. But that ultimately comes down to you guys and whether or not the capitalism that we have here in the state, if the market demands that or doesn't demand that, will kind of depend on how that goes. So, yeah, with all that being said, um, the museum launches on Christmas morning, and we're really excited about that. So we'll be able to see some of the stuff that we have currently, and also be able to help donate if you want us to be able to purchase more of that in the future. Let's see. Some people had asked about the commercials, the Idaho Department of Health and Welfare commercials. Um, in those, so if you take a normal drug commercial, you always at the very end will hear a lot of risk disclosure. Like they'll talk about the benefits and then they'll say, here's some of the potential side effects or here's some of the potential risks of this drug. And so some people had sent us the Idaho Department of Health and Welfare COVID-19 vaccine commercials and said, hey, why don't they have risk disclosure on these like all the other drugs do? And so we started doing our own research, and in the meantime had reached out to the Idaho Department of Health and Welfare and said, why is there not? And before they had even responded, we actually found the answers on the FDA website that if under emergency use authorization, these companies, if they did push their particular vaccine, would have to have those disclosures. But what the Idaho Department of Health and Welfare is doing is I'm trying to remember what they called it. Let me see if I can find it real quick. They called it something specific, and it's listed on the FDA website, and it's also in the article if you want to read it. But it's not required because they're not pushing a particular drug. It's a help-seeking advertisement. That's what the FDA calls it. And so, because the Idaho Department of Health and Welfare isn't pushing a particular vaccine, they do not have to disclose. Now, if the IDHW commercial said, go get the Pfizer vaccine, that would make it different than what they're doing right now, which is just saying, go get your COVID-19 vaccine. So because they're not pushing a particular vaccine, they're allowed to do a help-seeking advertisement, and they can avoid disclosing the risks of any particular vaccine. And so we asked them in a follow-up question, was there any reason? So if you're not lawfully required to do it, is there any reason you didn't do it, disclose it in the first place? And they said no, it really wasn't a consideration they'd given. They said the Department of Health and Welfare follows the recommendations of the CDC, which posts comprehensive information about vaccines, including efficacy, risk, and approval processes. So And they also said that stuff is covered on their website. So we went to their website, found where some of the safety and efficacy questions are, stuff like that, side effects and reactions. They have a section there. And then we put a link to all that so that you guys can see that. So that was the research that we had tried to do and find out for you guys, because there was a number of people who had asked why the vaccine people, or excuse me, why the Idaho Department of Health and Welfare don't have to have risk disclosure on the commercials that you'll see on YouTube or on the radio or on TV. Maybe I don't watch local TV, so I'm not sure if they play on there or not. We have had some updates to our candidate list. So for those that don't know, we have a 2022 primary election list for statewide offices. We don't have it for legislative right now. I don't know if we will, because it means I've got to do beyond a lot of work to try and do for all the legislative candidates, because there's usually somewhere around 200 or 300. And that's a lot of stuff. So at the very least, we've tried to do 2022 primary races. So we have updated that. Colton Boyles dropped out of the AG's race. There was a candidate, I think Jeff Dillon, that was listed in the, what race was that? The State Superintendent of Education. He has an active, so if you go on the Secretary of State's website, you're going to see a whole bunch of active candidates. Well, if you don't cancel your C1 with the SOS office, it'll show that you're running for office. And so we found out that he is not running, and it seemed like there was one more gubernatorial. Oh no, Luke Malik dropped out of the lieutenant governor's race, so currently there's only two there. Some people had asked about why the Democrat isn't listed in the lieutenant governor's race, and that's because this is for the primary. So if the Democrats end up with two candidates for lieutenant governor, then we would have the Democrats listed there. So you can see up in the governor's race, we have Robert Dempsey, Melissa Sue Robinson, and Shelby Rogenstad. The Democrats are all listed there. So we do still have to update this list a little bit. I believe the campaign manager for Ammon Bundy had sent us some more social media sites. So if you find a candidate on there and we don't have their social media or websites listed and you can find them, shoot them over to us. I try to do my best to find everything, but there's a lot of stuff. And so it's really, and some of it is not very searchable, I should say. And then what else have we got going on lately? I think we had another, I'm trying to find, the budget surplus. So there is a $1.6 billion budget surplus, and so we reached out to some lawmakers. I'm not going to go over all their responses. Some of them said, asking them what they would do with the surplus. Some of them said return it. Some of them said spend it on certain items. We'd reached out to Democrats and Republicans both on this issue and did our best to do that. So let's see. And I think I just wanted to see if there's any more. Stacy said, exactly, there used to be the editorial section in newspapers, and they were clearly opinions. The news was in the rest of the paper. Today, journalists mix editorials and news together, inserting their opinions and activism in place of facts. And again, yeah, that's exactly right, and we try to avoid doing that as best as possible. Some people have said, hey, your bias shows in the stories that you cover. We've actually covered a lot of stories from both sides, including people I know and don't know, and talking about some of the negative and positive things of those particular stories. Sometimes, again, I have lots of other things that I do, and this is just another one of the projects I'm trying to help do something on. And sometimes, if I get sick, like I had a really bad sinus infection, ended up in the hospital because of severe dehydration. Long story, but anyway, when all that happens, I'm reading the news and I'm like, I'm so tired. Like I literally can't get out of bed to be able to write because I'm just not feeling well, or whatever else happens in my life. And so sometimes stories happen that we don't cover, and it's never deliberate. It's just by the time I get around to being able to cover those, it's a week old and nobody cares. And so, yeah, we do try to cover every major political story in particular that happens in this state, as well as other smaller ones, from around the state. But sometimes we do miss stuff. So, really, I think that's it. Again, Colton Boyles dropped out of the AG's race, endorsed Raul Labrador. Raul Labrador jumped into the race, for those that don't know, for Attorney General. And I think that's kind of some of the biggest stories that we've had recently. So, again, we appreciate you guys. We appreciate you tuning in. I hope that you guys all have a great Christmas. We hope that you enjoy the Idaho Dispatch. At the end of the day, again, we'd love to keep this thing going. I would love to keep it going in the direction it is going. But if the vast majority of readers want news that is slanted in a particular direction, then there is stuff out there like that. And ultimately, we won't continue the Idaho Dispatch if the market is not there. If people really don't care enough to go, hey, it's worth $3 a month or whatever, I'll pitch in and help out. If that market isn't there ultimately, then we won't continue it, even if it is the right thing to do. We wouldn't continue it if the market and demand is not there for it. So anyway, appreciate you guys. Thank you. I hope you have a Merry Christmas, and we'll see you either sometime next week or after the New Year.